the three body problem in the overstory.
That's been very controversial.
Which one?
Three body problem.
Why is it controversial?
I just read an article about it, but it involves, representation on some level, I guess. I can't. I read so many stories about that, but basically it's like the author himself has said some stuff that bums some people out, maybe, if I remember correctly. He supported China or some. That's what the deal is, I think, is that the author has been supportive of the Chinese government, and people are like, they're monsters or whatever. I don't know. Basically, it's. Those guys, unfortunately, I'm not really sure it's even all their fault. They can't really help but not step in it for a while. People have really got it out for those two guys.
Okay.
And this guy might totally be a terrible person, but it just seems that, like...
According to a June 2019 interview and profile by The New Yorker, Liu avoids talking about politics. In the same article, Liu argued that democracy was not appropriate for modern China, and individual liberty and freedom of governance is, quote, not what Chinese people care about. Adding, quote, if you were to loosen up the country a bit, the consequences would be terrifying. He expressed support for policies such as the one-child policy and the Xinjiang re-education camps.
Okay, so there we go.
Saying, quote, the government is helping their economy and trying to lift them out of poverty. The article reported that Liu had, quote, become wary of touting the geopolitical underpinnings of his work.
So basically, like, he wrote this book that everyone thought was a really, really great book, and then they started talking to the guy, and they decided that they didn't really agree with all of his ideas. And then they were like, well, what does that mean for the book?
Yeah.
Because we're in a period in human history where we have a really hard problem separating art from the artist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was a game that came out on Steam recently. It was a game, I use that term loosely. It was a interactive, basically, Lovecraft story. And I talk a bit in that video about a lot of the controversy that surrounds Lovecraft, his racist, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic views of his earlier life and all of that. But then, I talk about how, a month before he died, he had all these letters where he
came around.
Yeah, he not only did he, come around, he admitted that, he, would like to destroy effigies of his earlier self. He has no place for intolerance, and he acknowledged that he was intolerant and a bigot and all that sort of other stuff. But he was also, like, fiercely anti-capitalist, at the end. He was going on long and very accurate screeds against capitalism. And,
then what's the problem? I mean,
what it is, the reason why I brought it up, though, is because you were talking about separating.
It's not just, I understand, but that's not, like, Lovecraft. I didn't even know that about Lovecraft.
Yeah.
The narrative about Lovecraft is that he was just the most terrible person in the history of the world, and he wrote some stories people really liked, but he was the worst. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that he. It's funny how that gets left out. You know what I mean? It's like, it's weird what we can at this point. In this point in our culture or whatever, what we can forgive and what we can't.
Yeah.
It's.
Well, I think, and a lot of people, it speaks to the whole separating the artist from their art, even before, realizing that about, his late in life turn. I still, had to come to terms with, what he was and what fed a lot of inspiration for his work, and. Everybody has to make their own decision about how they take that sort of stuff in. And I was able personally to come to terms with the idea that, an author and his work that I have a lot of respect for, the work itself at least, it was coming from a guy who was a bigot, and a pretty virulent one at that. Everybody makes their own determination of that sort of thing. And, some people's determination may not gel with somebody else's. And it's a point of contention amongst, black nerds at least, about whether or not it's appropriate to, enjoy Lovecraft's work or promote Lovecraft's work and all that sort of stuff. And I get that 100%. But in speaking with what this guy is saying, or speaking to this dude's dilemma, as it were, if his book is awesome, and it's kind of like the same with Orson Scott Card, right? Like, he's a huge douchebag, but Ender's Game is cool, and you can enjoy a work, and not like, I mean, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of hard to do if you know that enjoying this person's work is like feeding their mission in a certain way, like if they're getting money from it or whatever. But
it's tough. I guess
separate from that, you can still enjoy someone's work and not like be a proponent of whatever cause they.
I think the kids have a harder time with it, honestly. You know what I mean? Because when I grew up, there were lots of people that were terrible people that did great work. You know what I mean? Hemingway was an asshole. Terrible. It was a real jerk. And my wife and I were just talking about. Einstein was a huge asshole. It was terrible to his first wife. And generally terrible dad, and just he made there's a whole as far as his the way he was as a partner. Einstein was not, but and the thing is that like it's weird because he is inarguably maybe the smartest or second smartest person that maybe it's like not by IQ, but as far as what he's contributed, general relativity and all that kind of crap. But it's like when everyone gets mad at Woody Allen, they decide like whatever you think about Woody Allen, he's definitely like his work has fallen under the shadow of the allegations against him. You can't really do that with someone like Einstein, can you? You know what I mean? Because his work is essentially
different.
It's different
the contributions of those works are different for certain.
Yeah, they are. But
science would not be the same.
Exactly.
Without the
that's my
contribution of
point,
that work.
though. Science is forced to basically have to say like, maybe he wasn't the best husband or dad, but holy shit, general relativity, and I think it affects. I think that like. And the thing about science that saves it in that regard is that it's subjective. You can't. It's subjective. It's subjective.
Well, it's beyond. Beyond subjectivity.
It's objectively groundbreaking.
It has demonstrable benefits
for
human
subjective.
society.
So a person's opinion of the author, even if they try not to, it can affect their ability to appreciate the subjective works of their art. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because appreciating art is a subjective experience. And reverse. I meant the other thing.
Yeah.
And you can't, appreciating science is objective. But yeah.
First, so it's kind of common knowledge at this point that young HP Lovecraft exhibited some pretty racist views. And a lot of those racist views very evidently spilled over into and directly influenced a lot of elements in his storytelling. Particularly, it's obvious in stuff like The Horror of Red Hook or Call of Cthulhu, whenever he talks about like the nautical-looking Negroes that were responsible for the death of his uncle, and also the squatters in the mongrel squatter tribes in Louisiana, and Old Castro, and just how he talks about indigenous people in general all over it's a lot of his work kind of obviously it centers white men as the protagonists, but then their relationship with the scary ethereal sort of elements that drive Lovecraftian fear is always through a lens of like some indigenous tribe somewhere, like the West End or East End, or maybe it's West Indies, whatever they called the Caribbeans back then, or Indies rather, the West Indies, or whether it's like the tribes or tribes of squatters in Louisiana, or the Eskimo tribes and all of this sort of stuff. Like the one thing that all of these indigenous references in these Lovecraft stories have together is that they all kind of have like a universal alliance of worship and reverence towards the cosmic horror that plagues the white man. It's pretty on the nose in many instances, but especially Shadow over Innsmouth. Obed Marsh goes off and weds some indigenous woman from the East Indies, I think, and then comes back and, you know, starts converting his fishing village into some foreign cult, of which they all then suddenly turn into like Dagon-like creatures and whatnot. But just like the descriptions of, you know, how that whole thing went down when you read that book, just sounds like it's very nakedly on the face of it like this weird fear of like, you know, it's obviously a fear of the other, very literally, but also of like race mixing and all that sort of stuff. And it's just really, I mean, it's a sign of the times, honestly. Back in the early 1900s, and Lovecraft had a lot of young Lovecraft had a lot of resentment and hatred towards minorities and, you know, non-whites in general, but also he was fairly anti-Semitic at some points too. None of this stuff is new, but the thing that a lot of people don't know is that towards the end of Lovecraft's life, he kind of sort of starts to like have a face turn, you know, like he kind of has a little bit of a realization that young Lovecraft was a douchebag. And I don't know if I would go so, yeah, he actually admits that he's embarrassed by a lot of his earlier takes, his earlier writings. In addition, not just from the race point of view, but a lot of his racial resentment stemmed from his struggles in his young life with finding employment, especially like Howard Red Hook, who was trying to get work in New York and just saw that there were so many, you know, black and brown people and people from Europe and whatnot, in foreign invaders that were taking the jobs, and he had a hard time getting a job, and, you know, blamed it on them, you know, blamed it on ethnic minorities, you know, and he had this kind of a worldview of, it's a white supremacist worldview, but he, like the way that he describes it in a lot of his writings almost seems like it's meritocracy by the way of being white being your merit, you know, like, and there's a lot of resentment that comes just from those struggles. But in the later portion of his life, he actually not only, in addition to just like, you know, kind of being embarrassed by his intolerant views from his youth, he also just goes full on into like unapologetic anti-capitalist and anti-capitalism, you know, which is really the kind of Lovecraft that you love to see. So let me see if I can I like this track. What is this? This was on an earlier stream I did, and I really liked it. Softy Glimpses. This track reminds me of it was playing when I did one of my earlier streams. I was talking about building this PC I'm using, and I was having a lot of back and forth about whether I wanted to spend the money doing it or not. And I had a lot of the components just sitting in a pile, and I was contemplating just selling the components and buying a ready-built PC. But I was recounting a tale of meeting someone who, you know, meeting a girl at a bar, and, you know, we got to talking, and she convinced me to build my own PC. Like, that was the way to go. She was a Twitch streamer at the time, I think. And I wasn't, I mean, it wasn't like, you know, we were dating or anything, not at all. We were just, you know, two people at a bar, and, you know, it was her birthday actually, and she struck up the conversation and whatnot, and I bought her a birthday drink, and then we started talking about what we were into, and I was talking about wanting to build a PC, etc., etc. She talked me into doing it because she built PCs herself several times, and she was going to help me build this one, but then the pandemic struck, and I put off buying all the more expensive components because I didn't know about my job stability situation. But long story short, at some point during the pandemic, she died, and while I was talking about that on the stream, this track was playing, and it was just kind of like a really sad track underlying the notion that if I was going to go through with building my PC, then I needed to do it in order to like go, I would do it in tribute to her, right? Like, she died, And one of the last things I talked with her about was building this PC. And if I had sold my components and bought a ready-built PC, it would have been almost like a betrayal. Well, nothing that serious or stark, but like building the PC was in tribute to her. So that track of music that just played reminded me of that. And lo and behold, I'm doing this stream from that PC. So I did it. I built the PC, and it's in tribute to you. So there you go. I hope you're enjoying the stream. So, letter from Lovecraft. Later on in life, I think this was like maybe two years, maybe. When did he die? Let me see when this was. 37. So this was actually the year he died. So it was literally one of the last things he wrote. This was February 2nd. He died in March. So this was like a month before his death. All this from the antiquated mummy who was on the other side until 1931. Well, I can better understand their inert blindness and defiant ignorance of the reactionaries from having been one of them, describing himself as a reactionary. I know how smugly arrogant I was, wrapped up in the arts, the natural, not social sciences, the externals of history and antiquarianism. Let me zoom in. The abstract academic phases of philosophy, and so on. All the one-sided standard lore to which, according to the traditions of the dying order, a liberal education was limited. All this comes up with the humiliating force through an incident of a few days ago, when young Conover, having established contact with Hindenburger, the ex-owner of WT, obtained from the latter a long epistle which I had wrote Edward Baird on February 3rd, 1924, in response to a request for biographical and personal data. Little Willis asked permission to publish the text in his combined SFC fantasy, and I began looking the thing over to see what it was like, for I had not the least recollection over having penned it. Well, I managed to get through after about 10 closely typed pages of egotistical reminiscence and showing off and expressions of opinion about mankind and the universe. I did not faint, but I looked around for a 1924 photograph of myself to burn, spit on, or stick pins in. Holy Hades, was I that much of a dub at 33, only 13 years ago? There was no getting out of it. I really had thrown all that haughty, complacent, snobbish, self-centered, intolerant, keyword, intolerant bull at a mature age when anybody but a perfect damn fool would have known better. That earlier illness had kept me in seclusion, limited my knowledge of the world, and given me something of a fatuous effectiveness of a belated adolescent when I finally was able to get out more in 1920 is hardly much of an excuse. Well, there was nothing to be done, except to rush a note back to Conover and tell him I'd dismember him, and run the fragments through his sausage grinder if he ever thought of printing such a thing. The only consolation lay in the reflection that I had matured. A bit since 24. It's hard to have done all one's growing up since 33, but that's a damn sight better than not growing up at all. Pretty significant. Acknowledging that he was an intolerant prig. And, he's embarrassed by it. He was embarrassed by it and threatened to butcher a dude who published some of his more intolerant writings. And then there's this one. For every well-fed Casper milquetoast whose personal advantage is served by prosperity of the utility company which gives him a fat salary, there are 1,000 or 2 John Smiths whose personal advantage, indeed whose endurable existence, depends on governmental regulations of the company's hours and wages and rates, and perhaps on the government's absorption and non-profit operation of that company. The government's absorption and non-profit operations of that company. That, to me, sounds like seize the means of production, my friends. Now that John Smiths are beginning to know where their advantage lies, they will act just as Casper does, blindly upholding what will personally serve them best. And when their millions of votes are counted against those Caspers, the result is not hard to predict. The trend is further promoted by the fact that not all fat salaried beneficiaries of capitalism are Caspers. A few can reason and can see that capitalism is automatically doomed by the natural course of economics unless upheld by fascist bayonets. Let's reread that last Lovecraftian prose. A few can reason and can see that capitalism is automatically doomed by the natural course of economics unless upheld by fascist bayonets. HP Lovecraft's letter to C.L. Moore, February 2nd, 1937, approximately 1 month before he died. A few can reason and could see that capitalism is automatically doomed by the natural course of economics unless upheld by fascist bayonets. Take a look at what's happening in America nowadays, folks. Why'd I say folks like I'm fucking Rush Limbaugh? Folks, I'm gonna need you to take a look at America. I want you to see all the different ways that fascist bayonets manifest themselves on the streets of our country today. Whether it's our draconian immigration policies or whether it's by our own police who are marching in the streets, ruthlessly executing black, brown, and yes, even white people without due process or really any kind of legal ramification at all. These are the fascist bayonets that are upholding capitalism today, my friends. That's my Rush Limbaugh. I don't know how good it is. I can't remember that guy's voice very well, and I'm very happy for that. And the last one here. But the real joke, of course, is... But the real joke, of course, is that all this isn't a matter of choice anyhow. I always do that when I see an exclamation point. Capitalism is dying from internal as well as external causes, and its own leaders and beneficiaries are less and less able to kit themselves. 1924. Remember, this is 1924. Or 1937, rather. This is 1937. I'm no economist, but from recent readings, I've been able to form a rough picture of the dilemma, the need to restructure consumers' goods and to pile up a needless plethora of producing equipment in order to maintain the irrational surplus called profit, which has caused orthodox economists like Hayek and Robbins to admit that only starvation wages and artificial scarcity could stabilize the profit system in future and avert increasing cyclical depressions of utterly destructive scope. Laissez-faire capitalism is dead. God, I wish that were true. Laissez-faire capitalism is dead. Make no mistake about that. The only avenue of survival for plutocracy is a military and emotional fascism whereby millions of persons will be withdrawn from the industrial arena and placed on a dole or in concentration camps with high-sounding patriotic names. That or socialism. Take your choice. Let's read that again. The only avenue of survival for plutocracy is a military or an emotional fascism whereby millions of persons will be withdrawn from the industrial arena and placed on a dole or in concentration camps with high-sounding patriotic names. That or socialism. Take your choice. In the long run, it won't be the New Deal, but the mere facts of existence which will be recognized as the real and inevitable slayer of Hooverism. Nobody is going to, quote, destroy the system, for it has been destroying itself ever since it evolved out of that old agrarian handicraft economy a century and a half ago. Yeah, Lovecraft, right before he passed away, really fucking, for lack of a better phrase, he really woke up to the realities of the disastrous capitalism that was corroding and corrupting, American society, pre-New Deal, the New Deal era, which, could best be summed up also by this. Begins to regret past bigotry, dies immediately. That's what happens, folks. Being a good person saps your life force. If he had remained the obnoxious, intolerant, racist prick that he was when he was younger, he'd probably still be alive today. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked what I said, what Justin said, if you like the content we're providing, if you had any kind of laughs at all, even if you hate us, if you hate my guts, if you want to stab me, if you want to say all sorts of horrible things to me, cool. Like the video, subscribe. You'll get fed all sorts of shit you'll probably hate. And if you like us, you'll get fed all sorts of shit you probably like. So please and thank you.